Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Marius or NC0R, and as already said, I will tell you a small fairy tale about CubeSats. But before I actually start, I know you are probably all tired. You had some 1.5 day of conference already behind you, probably before some workshops, and the amount of Red Bull says to me, you are tired, so am I. As said, I played the CTF, so please excuse small failures in case some will happen. And the second warning is that my presentation style is kind of a little bit more loosened. So, yep, you will see. The presentation itself is arranged in 3 parts. First of all, I will tell you a little bit about CubeSats and their security situation itself. Then I'm telling a little bit about the things and the stuff I did. And at the end of the presentation, I want to actually share some impressions and insight I got during my work. So let's start with our fairy tale. A not so long time ago in a galaxy close by, CubeSats. In 1999, Calipo and Stanford were developing and publishing the CubeSat standard. The main aim is to be able to produce small satellites to a reasonable costs and bring them for low costs into space. They have a size about, or a 1 unit CubeSat has a size of 10 cubic centimeter. Actually, this should be a 3, not a 2. And they get so-called piggyback launched. So when a rocket is going up, for example, to the ISS, there are some slots reserved for CubeSats, and they are just on the way getting shoot out in the low Earth orbit. And due to that, the costs are extremely low, from over several millions to from classical CubeSat projects. It's now realizable with less than $1 million to bring up a small satellite in space. But remember, it's a very small satellite. This small costs make it especially attractive for universities to look into those projects, to get students to work with CubeSats. And in between, there are over 100 of the small satellites around in space. They were brought up by different actors, universities, also some commercial ones, and the amateur radio community is also quite interested in this since, yeah, it's communication. However, this presentation focuses mainly on academic CubeSats. So let's have a very simplified threat model. If we have some object, we have 3 ways to access it. First of all, we can physically access it, physically access the machine. I will say it's quite hard with a satellite. The link access, the communication between the base station and the satellite, is rather open. I mean, it's transmitted over an open medium. Everybody can eavesdrop. If it's decrypted, try to encrypt. If it's plain text, just listen to it. And possibly also send their own messages to the satellite. And then another threat, of course, is the network access. So actually that an attacker will compromise the base station, which was done quite a few times for commercial satellites. However, this is not part of this presentation. Here we are mainly focusing on the link access. So let's look, how does the security looks like? Well, for amateur radio and commercial satellites, they are mainly the classical solutions. They're using encryptions on the link, proprietary software, and basically some mix of encryption and security through obscurity. However, as I said, we focus here on academia. And here, security is often not present. Sometimes, I really have to say, some satellites still have reasonable security. They use either encrypted link or authenticated links. I will talk about this in a few minutes a little bit more. However, the main question which I had when I started to work with CubeSats is, why the heck is no one caring about security? So I worked a little bit in this field and traveled to a conference and spoke with other CubeSats developers, other universities, and I totally paraphrase here, but that's kind of a little bit the spirit. Nobody is going to hack us. So we all know these words are kind of strange. I mean, Nobody was expecting that somebody is flying to a 2-meter wide temperature control port to get to a nuclear reactor and blow up the Death Star. But hey, it happened. However, this nobody is going to hack us actually has some truth if we are thinking a little bit more about it. This guy doesn't have any benefits from hacking a CubeSat. CubeSats are just small satellites doing some research tasks, and there's not really a commercial gain of overtaking a CubeSat. So what kind of attackers are we dealing with? I don't want to criminalize ham radio operators here at all, but it's, in my opinion, more reasonable that people who actually have already the equipment to communicate with those tiny satellites could get a little bit curious and just look around what's possible. So it's not really that we should be afraid that CubeSats are getting overtaken by harmful people, but still it would be nice to have some security. So to put it in a little bit better way, the CubeSat security, it's about costs. The project itself are aimed to be more or less low budget projects, and buying frequencies for the actual communication is expensive. But there are the amateur radio frequencies, which are free to use for everyone who has an amateur radio license, and also for satellite communication. The problem here is, if the satellite is not in service of the amateur radio community, you are not allowed to encrypt. So for academic CubeSats, most of the time, encryption is not possible. And at the end, from the other side, talking about the costs, an attacker would have to pay quite a lot of money to actually get the equipment to attack a CubeSat, and the benefits are rather low, as I said. So, I already mentioned sometimes, or some CubeSats do have security. One example I want to mention here is GAMX1, which was developed by the University of Aalborg in Denmark and launched in 2013. And they developed the so-called CubeSat space protocol. This space protocol is open source, and it aims to be a protocol suite to be used in CubeSats. It's really a nice protocol, and it supports features like XTEA encryption in counter mode or HMAC SHA-1 for the message. However, this one, as it is by now, is missing replay protection. So basically, if we communicate with a satellite, even if it is encrypted, we could just eavesdrop the message and replay it. Let's get to the second part. For everyone who is not remembering Star Wars, Dagobah was the planet where Luke actually got his training by the Jedi Master Yoda to get, a trained Jedi. And so do I want to talk about how I got to do with all the CubeSats and how this started. So I worked with the NTNU test satellite, which is basically the CubeSat project of the Norwegian University of Technology and Science, where I did my master studies. I participated in the project 2013 and 14, so I'm more or less quite fresh out of the project. And the full thing actually started already in 2010, and the launch of the satellite itself, it's planned for 2016 or 17. We are not quite sure about it. One special thing about this CubeSat in comparison to other CubeSats is they want to build everything from scratch. Most of the CubeSat projects are using at least some commercial off-the-shelf parts. Here not. They actually hooked already up and designed a hardware design and built their communication stack while using CSP inside there, and the software all around how the things are inside the satellite and on the base station working are also developed by them. And one, especially for me, interesting part, they wanted uplink security. They said someone in 2011, hey, we have to look into the link. It's totally open. So I got into the project and looked around and saw there was already some work done. Basically, The main insight was, okay, we can't encrypt, but that's actually not the problem. We have a scientific payload. We are just taking pictures from the Earth and relaying them back to the Earth. So it's okay if the communication is open. All what we need is authentication for the uplink. If we, from the base station, send something to the satellite, we have to be sure that no other base station can send comments to the satellite. We don't want that somebody is overtaking our satellite. So what was already done was using the HMAC functionalities of the CubeSats space protocol and appending sequence numbers as unique element to every message to actually fix the lack of rebuild protection. So I came to the project and saw that the resynchronization protocol was a little bit vulnerable. So I said, okay, hey, why aren't we using timestamps? The satellite has a small clock, a real-time clock on board. So we could just use this as a unique element to prevent replay attacks. And then I also said, if we are already doing that, we actually don't have to stick to the CubeSats space protocol. We can just add our own modular layer and have the security features there instead of dangling around with another open source project. So a packet for nuts was then designed to look something like that. We have AX25 as link 1 layer, and then we actually do the security validation, adding the CubeSats space protocol for routing between the different components of the satellite and then the actual payload. As authentication, in short, I just said, okay, hey, the satellite is broadcasting the timestamp all day, all around the time in their beacon message. The base station is snatching this timestamp, constructing the HMAC from the message it wants to send with the timestamp appended, and sends these 3 components to the satellite. The satellite then actually verifies that the timestamp is valid, so that it's a fresh message, and that the HMAC is correct constructed. And if so, it sends a response. So after this was my preliminary project work, and I decided to take this on in my master's thesis, not just sketching it up, but doing a little bit more theoretical and formal things with it. So the master's thesis had at the end the topic integration and verification of a keyed hash message authentication scheme based on broadcast timestamp for nuts. So we had the word verification in there. What is verification in these terms? I'm not talking here about software verification, although this is also an important part. No, here it's the formal verification of the actual cryptographic protocol, how the messages are in the exchange. Is this actually secure? The goal, obviously, is to assure this correctness, to say, okay, our satellite looks sound, or our communication protocol with the satellite looks sound. So formal verification are, at the end, formal methods based on math and logic to prove that security properties, like a message is authenticated, are verified. To do so, there are automated tools. For example, a Whisper or Skycer. I will talk a little bit about Skycer. And if you want to know more about formal verification, I recommend to look up the Needham-Schroeder protocol, which was published in 1978. And in 1995, Lowell came up and with methods of formal verification and showed that the protocol actually had a problem. And so sad it sounds, the Needham-Schroeder protocol is still commonly used to test different formal verification methods. It's got kind of a punching bag. So, authentication. We want to authenticate our message and to verify that it's authenticated. However, what is authentication exactly? I mean, if I say authentication, everybody has the grasp about what it is. But if we think closer about it, it can have different aspects. For example, aliveness as defined by Lowell in 1997 is just when one communication part is exchanging messages with another or receiving messages from another, the other one doesn't have necessarily to know that it was communicating with A. It just sends a message and know it arrived somewhere. And A, at the end, just know that the B part of the communication is somewhere around, that it's live. But it doesn't say that B knows it was communicating with A. This actually is actually fixed by weak agreement. For example, there A and B are knowing that they are actually communicating with each other and that there's no man in the middle, for example. And then we can also bring in a set of data. And then we can also say, okay, we want that both A and B are agreeing on the data, that they are correct. I mean, they can communicate with each other and say, hey, yes, I'm definitely communicating with the other part, but the data, I don't know if they are correct or if they got tampered on during the transport. And this kind of agreement over a set of data is called non-injective agreement in the context of formal verification. So this was just a short introduction. And now to the automated tools. I used during my master's thesis CubeSats, which is developed by Cas Kramers, a professor at the University of Oxford. And in comparison to other tools, it has a very easy input language, comprehensible, easy accessible. It's in general relatively easy or intuitive. I would say intuitive to use. And also in comparison to other tools, it's efficient. So I put the protocol, as seen before, into CubeSats and came out with this. We see several red messages. Red messages are not good. We have fails. So the protocol is obviously flawed. So what to do? I said, okay, in this case, even though this protocol is in theory horrible and not working, even it looked kind of okayish, we can use it anyway. Because if we go back and look what the actual failures are, they are on the base station side. The base station cannot authenticate the satellite. It cannot say that it was right now communicating with a satellite. But first of all, we can do the academic answer. We wanted to do uplink security, not downlink security. So this problem is outside the scope of this work. This is possible, but not really a nice answer to this problem. Instead, we can say, we just assume that the satellite is a trusted entity. The probability that someone is putting up a fake satellite to tamper our base station is rather low. Again, here, it's about the costs and the risk. And besides that, I mean, the other way, we're just being on the Earth and trying to communicate with the base station. We have, through the fast-moving satellite in space, a physical phenomena called Doppler shift, which is actually kind of physically authenticating that the message we received came out of space. If we would receive with our equipment a message from the ground, it won't be readable. And it's not possible to reproduce it that easy unless you can drive a car with 8 kilometers per second and send messages to us. That would be impressive. So the implementation, just short look on the development environment I used. I had a small real-time clock hooked up over I2C to an evaluation kit, AFVR UC3A3, which is using the same AVR 32-bit mega processor as our satellite, and yeah, AVR Dragon debug tool. So what do we see here? It's really low cost. The development area is not expensive. All this together, the possible most expensive part was the real-time clock. So this tiny thing to the left. After the implementation on the evaluation kit, I ran some tests and looked how good or how fast it is. First of all, the authentication takes between 3 to 5 microseconds, which is quite okay. And then we have the problem that we need, due to the transportation delay between ground and space, we need a tolerance for the timestamp. We can just not directly say, yeah, the timestamp is definitely in 1 second precision correct. We have to use a tolerance. And since the packets can have different sizes, also the transportation time differs. So I actually ran a test and looked how many replays are possible during a small period of time. And as small as expected, if the packet size is small, we can replay the packet a lot of time and it will be accepted. However, this is also, it's not beautiful, I agree on that, but it's okay, because we can here say that the comments, which are small, don't really affect the satellite state if they are executed 2 times behind each other. Now, the third part, what I learned and what I want to share with you, the moral of the story. Every fairy tale needs a moral, and if it is, bring not the wolf to your grandmother. Crypto is hard. We already know that. It's nothing new. However, crypto in space is harder. We have some problems we don't have on Earth. We do have in space, for example, random bit flips occurring caused by space radiation. So inside the memory, 1 bit just randomly gets flipped, inverted, and we somehow have to deal with it. And I can, for example, tamper cryptographic keys or authentication codes. Then we have, compared to devices on Earth or user devices on Earth, rather low computational power. The link budget is small. We cannot send a lot of things in a short period of time. We have actually to care of that whatever we are doing with authentication codes and so on, that the overhead of the message is not getting too big so that it will be inefficient to communicate. And then the last thing, I more or less discovered, not discovered, but which was bugging me, people which are developing satellites and wanting to do security are kind of paranoid. They don't want to get locked out at any case. I mean, it's totally comprehensible. If I put up a satellite in space, I don't want that I, by myself, cannot communicate. So I guess a lot of satellites actually do have a backdoor by design, and which is rather called fail-safeness in this case, to have a method to communicate with a satellite even if the normal authentication way or security way fails. In our case, in the NUTS project, we solved the issue by having 2 radios. One radio is just doing authenticated traffic, and the other radio just accepts all traffic, but is not used by default. So if you know the frequency of the other radio, you basically win. Then, my second insight, thermal verification is awesome. The protocol, when I designed it during my project work, I said, hey, that's secure, it looked good, it looks good, it looks like it's doing the things I want it to do. But thermal verification easily showed me, hey, it's flaws. It's totally flawed. And with tools like SkySar, I would say formal verification, even though it comes from academia, it doesn't have to be limited to academia. We could probably use it also for other protocols we design. And in fact, also for example, the Internet Key Exchange Protocol in between had been verified by formal verification that it's working quite fine. And as we know in crypto, the implementation can be very insecure. I actually screwed up the implementation for my NUTS project as well. So it might be better to have a sound design from the beginning. Then, MD5. If you looked at the slides before, I was talking about using HMAC MD5. And we all know MD5 is broken and we shouldn't use it today anymore. But it's okay some days. We just have to know in which context. Here, it was used in combination with the HMAC algorithm. And HMAC itself, the security of HMAC, does not rely on the underlying hash function. Then we have according to literature, we need 2 to the power of 64 tries to restore a key from HMAC MD5. Well, we have to listen to 2 to the power of 65 messages, sorry. However, the NUTS satellite is just exchanging, or is expected to exchange 2 to the power of 16 messages during its lifetime. So we are not hitting this range by far. And the other advantages in this small computational power environment is MD5 has a small digest size, so it doesn't increase the overhead, and it's relatively fast to compute. However, I want to stress out, I'm definitely not saying MD5 all the things. Just know your constraints, your limits, your environment, and look if you sometimes maybe also have to use a rather weaker cryptographic hash function. My last insight, academic projects, which are mainly driven by students, are hard to coordinate. I was not in the part of the coordination, but I saw it by myself. Everyone is coming new to the project and first of all wants to change everything, wants to change the world. So did I. I said, okay, hey, there were a sequence number, let's go for timestamps instead. Why? Because as a student, you are young and you want to have some impact and do something on your own and not just taking things others did before and just redoing it. So, however, someone with students, it's just going to be a rush for deadlines. You just want to deliver the report, deliver the master thesis. You want to get finished as soon as possible, and afterwards, you probably leave, like me. I wrote the master thesis and left the project. I'm still communicating with them, but for example, now the person who is continuing the security just came new to the project and looked at my security solution and said, hey, the protocol is flawed. We can probably do something better. So also now, he is now changing. So I will here say the continuity of the project is lacking. People are exchanging, people have new ideas, and it's not, or it's hard to get a finished product here. And yeah, procrastination. A problem a lot, or at least I have, I think a lot of others have as well, is also here strong. I think the original launch for the NUTS satellite was planned for 2013 or 14. Now we are off by only 3 or 4 years, double the time. However, this is all totally okay in this context. It's not a problem. CubeSats, it's meant to give students the possibility to work with space technology in this context. And it works fine in this way. So, we are almost done. Just the work which is ongoing right now, a security solution has to be integrated to the actual NUTS hardware or to the actual microcontrollers on the satellite. It has to be tested against radiation, as I said, bit flips. And then, of course, when it is in space, there has to be a test operation and show if it is working, and if so, we possibly helped a little bit the academic community. And one very important problem we don't have faced by now is key management. How are we managing key in space in an environment where things can corrupt it and we can't really reliably save things? So do we want to have rekeying algorithms? How do we protect them? And so on. And one personal project I talked to the developers of the CubeSat Space Protocol, and maybe we can also integrate more security like replay protection fixed in the CSP. So, last but not least, I want to thank a few people. First of all, the head and coordinator of the NUTS project, Roger Birkeland, who does an amazing job with keeping all the students together with all these different ideas and this change, and keep the project still running and getting funding every year. And then I want to thank Stig Frode Melsnes, my professor, who was supervising my master thesis. Furthermore, Timo Stein, a friend of mine who is like at every hour I can call him and he looks at my slides, talks with me about ideas. And then some groups, of course, the team, the full nuts team, and my CTF team, Tasteless. Thanks.
We have time for 2 questions, if there are any. Okay.
Hi, thanks for the nice presentation. Incidentally, I used to work for some project which looked into ADS-B security, the air traffic controllers and the airplanes traffics. Basically, the issue there is also link budgeting, the key management of the bits corruption and so on. And luckily our research made it to some people to create different protocols and different government initiatives to create some standards. Are you trying to incorporate some of those standards, or do you think it's a good idea, it's a bad idea to take from, let's say, air traffic controller standardization or implementation efforts and bring something to CubeSats or to amateur satellites technology? Because it's somehow related, but it's not exactly the same league, so this like a personal opinion.
Yeah, of course. We can, in academia and CubeSats, we can surely also learn from these systems. However, we are kind of aiming to do research and having something novel with the things we are doing. So it might be that a lot of things or what I did or what people doing is just not used at all later on, but a small percent of things done in research actually taken on to the real world later on. And I think that's very important that it works in both ways. So that the real world from the part-wise can inspire academia, and academia can bring things to the real world with enough time.
One more question?
You were saying something about slim chances of having a fake satellite. What about something that comes between your satellite and your signal? So probably another object that can interfere. Or even another satellite, I don't know.
Yeah, it's totally possible. I agree on that. I mean, what I said with what I meant with the low possibility of a fake satellite is that's a possibility that someone targeted is putting up a satellite to temper our base station is rather unlikely. Of course, there are interferences with other satellites, and during CubeSat launches, it happened quite often that one satellite just got in the shadow of another one and was not reachable for the second CubeSat team. This is quite sad, but it happens, and I cannot really do much in the medium about this right now.
Okay, then thank you so much for the presentation.